Several months ago, when the diaconate met to discuss plans for pulpit supply during summer, the idea of lay sermons was proposed. Various aspects of this idea were discussed and simply summarized. Here I am. Now, while I am generally comfortable speaking publicly, I feel compelled to share that I don't feel qualified to offer scholarship on theological topics or to impart lessons from a master understanding of Scripture. So, in considering what I could impart to you in reflection, I naturally turn to the garden, because it's a place where over the last decade I found lessons of faith in abundance. And it seems that as we head into fall, this is a natural time to think about concepts of harvest and bounty. As we enjoy the fruits of the fall bounty, pumpkins, apples, cider, falling leaves, etc., we may not necessarily reflect on the factors that go into making that bounty. If we make a parallel to harvest bounty in terms of our church community, we might ask, how do we define bounty here in our church community and in our faith? What does that harvest look like, and how do we attain it? These are interesting questions to ponder as we return to church in the fall, especially during a time when much still seems unsettled with the pandemic and in general. I don't have all the answers, but I do wish to share some reflections on what gardening has taught me and how these lessons might relate to creating a bountiful harvest in our church community. Firstly, simply begin with small tasks and be willing to work hard. When my husband Andrew and I moved into our home over a decade ago, we were in our late 30s. It was the first home we ever purchased. Until then, we had lived in apartments outside Boston and New York City and had not much experience doing the things required in tending an acre of land. Although we share an equal love of the outdoors and are not opposed to hard work, some of the tasks we needed to tackle seem overwhelming. Many years later, with the property transformed, here is what I've learned. You've got to start somewhere, so simply figure out within reason where and how to begin. You don't have to do it all at once, and hard work, determination, and perseverance will be required, so know that going into it. If we consider our church community a garden to tend, grow, and perhaps in some ways transform, we could equally become overwhelmed by the entirety of the task and therefore not know where or how to begin. But if the desire to tend and grow is there and hard work is willing, sometimes simply asking, where reasonably should we begin, becomes the seed that gets the garden growing. Work together to create a shared vision and have a plan. Most of us would agree that the probability of success in any endeavor is greater when there is a clear vision and plan. This is true in designing gardens and in growing churches. Setting visions and plans is often easier said than done. For example, even though my husband and I generally agree on what we hope to accomplish on our property, we've had many discussions about vision and made compromises. My husband respects my desire to create a space where pollinators and birds are supported, and I respect his desire to enjoy a space that can be reasonably maintained. It's taken years of open communication, working together, and compromise to find a balance that we both embrace. Now, one of the things I appreciate about the UCC tradition is the expectation that our church community garden be tended by us all. As members and friends of this church community, I'm sure that each one of you can recall an endeavor that you've been part of here where vision and planning were important. Yet, even in a faith community, we may not always share the same vision for what our faith garden should look like, and it's a much larger process to reach consensus in a community of this size than one household. It's critical, though, to find balance in vision, as without it, the planning process cannot begin. Planning itself can be a challenge because the best plans should realistically reflect time and resources. My garden looks very different from when I first started, and it's continuously evolved based on a collected vision and been planned with a realistic account of our available resources. This is not to say that we've never made mistakes or changed course. We certainly have, and we've learned from these experiences and moved on. Our MCC garden community is no different in this regard. Always be willing to learn from one another. In the process of transforming our property, I don't know what I would have done without the many resources available to me. I've learned so much about caring for all kinds of plants, shrubs, and trees, what to plant to support pollinators and birds, when to fertilize, transplant, and deal with pests and other problems. In wanting our garden to thrive, I've eagerly learned this information online, in the library, by talking with people and by observation. As I mentioned, I knew nothing when I first became a property owner. You might find it amusing to know that several times I witnessed my neighbor and fellow MCC member John Spain tend his yard and thought, well, John's trimming his boxwoods, guess it's time to trim mine. We have a wealth of knowledge here to learn from in growing our faith garden. So many of you have served this community on different boards over the years and or have been involved in different events, come to the table with your life experience and skills, as well as knowledge of church and town history. As we together tend this church garden, I believe it's important to remember that there will always be something to learn from one another and that learning is an ongoing process. As we seek to do the work to plant and reap a bountiful faith harvest, let us remain open to the ideas, thoughts, and knowledge among us. Acknowledge that our faith's needs are diverse. One of the things I cherish in the garden is the diversity offered by hosting different plants. This diversity ensures continuous blooms and color throughout the season, offers various shapes and textures to behold, and provides vital resources to an array of wildlife. In order for diverse plantings to thrive, I've learned that it's important to pay attention to the unique soil, sun, water, and fertilizing needs of each plant so that they can be placed in the best spot and cared for as appropriate from season to season. I've also learned, though, that despite the best effort to lovingly tend to a plant's every need, sometimes they simply do not thrive. In some cases, I might figure out the issue in time to make adjustments, and sometimes nothing can be done and the plant is lost. It's heartbreaking to lose a plant, but nothing in the garden is guaranteed. As individuals, we are like these diverse plants. We have unique needs regarding our spiritual growth, and perhaps different expectations in how these needs should be met at church. It's realistic to acknowledge that no two persons' needs are the same, and yet they are equally important. It also seems fair to point out that while plants come with plant tags to indicate how to care for them, people do not. This means that it's up to all of us to try to know one another and to understand the needs we might have in order for our individual and collective faith to flourish. Accept that there will always be weeds and consider viewing them in new ways. As to be expected, gardeners take different approaches on how to deal with weeds. Approaches range from leave them be, to douse them with chemical, or somewhere in between. Approaches aside, I want to focus here on the concept of seeing weeds differently to begin with, because how we view weeds affects how we approach them. For example, take crabgrass. I view crabgrass as a weed to eradicate. It can take over the yard, crowd out other things, and produces thousands of seeds that, if not addressed, will result in more crabgrass. So, each spring I faithfully follow a plan to spread an organic product to keep it from germinating. I test my soil temperature to know when to spread it and mark my calendar. It seems to be working. Some folks might feel the same about dandelions as I do about crabgrass. I do not. The product I spread to eradicate crabgrass may also prevent some dandelions from germinating, but if they do germinate, I leave them. I've learned that dandelions are an early nectar source for pollinators, and so I see them as such. To another extreme, I've actually overseeded areas of my lawn with clover, as it offers nitrogen to the soil, keeps the lawn green when the grass gets burned, and bees love it. No doubt you see crabgrass, dandelions, and clover in your own way, and so put time and energy into addressing them as you find appropriate. Now think about areas of our church community where you might identify weeds. Perhaps the weeds are perpetual issues yet unresolved, a process that needs attention, or other thorny issues, garden pun intended. Since we are likely as a congregation to see weeds differently, we need to agree on that part first, before we can decide what approach to use, if any, to address them. In my garden, I've discovered that seeing weeds differently helps prioritize how to address them and better focus time and resources. In other words, I've saved a fair amount of time by letting the dandelions do their thing, but crabgrass, I'm on to you. Growing a garden is hard work. Helping one another makes a difference. Care for a yard and garden is hard work. It never ends, and sometimes I grow weary of tasks. It's amazing, though, how one's spirit can be lifted by the smallest gift of help. Take, for example, my rock wall project last spring. With some rocks that had been removed from another garden bed, I decided to build a short rock wall to hide an unsightly area. Relocating the rocks took longer than expected, and I had several heavy ones still to move. As I stood for a moment to rest, Andrew emerged from the house, having seen my effort from the window. He had put another project aside and came out to move the remaining rocks for me. It was just the boost I needed to lift my spirits and complete the task. That I didn't have to ask made it all the sweeter. Fast forward to another time, and Andrew was clearing brush to take to the transfer station. I was doing something else, but stopped to help him because I know that having a partner to load the trailer makes the task take half the time. When I emerged from the house with my work clothes on, the look of gratitude on his face said everything about what this small act of help meant. Now, I grew up in the UCC tradition, so I know that we're a helping bunch, and I've witnessed many gifts of help here. As a faith community, we know how to help each other, and we do. This is a gentle reminder, though, never to underestimate how even the smallest gesture of help might be just the boost of spirit to another. As gardeners at home or in faith, we all have times when we grow weary, and helping hands lift us up and sustain us. Have hope that the work we do spreads faith and show gratitude along the way. More than any other lesson of the garden, for me, the most powerful one is of hope and gratitude. There have been many times over the years of tending my garden when plans did not work out, plants did not thrive or died, or something happened that made me have to start over in areas. It forces me to accept that in the end, I'm not really in charge of anything. Nonetheless, I must keep faith and hope that the vision I have, the plans I make, and the work I do all contribute to a garden that brings the joy of blooms and a yard alive with pollinators and birds. God in all his goodness knows how to make sure that I do not lose faith. After years of not having enough sunspots to grow pollinator plants, I was finally able to plant some milkweed. We had one chrysalis form, and I witnessed a monarch emerge and take its first flight. I'll never forget how, when it took off from the plant, it flew straight at me and over my head. I will also never forget that when I turned to watch it fly away, I realized that it had not flown away at all, but had landed on my right shoulder just for a moment. The hope and thinking that maybe I was doing the right things to bring such beauty into my yard filled my soul, and the gratitude I held in that moment for this momentous gift of encouragement fills me to this day. I now look everywhere in the yard for similar inspiration, and the more I look, the more I find. And when I find that inspiration, I make sure to mark in gratitude that it really does matter. This can also happen at church, when we see hope in all things, from varied musical offerings, our children in Sunday school, work being done to restore our church building, mission activities, and more. And when we take the time to express gratitude for this bounty. The lessons from the garden are indeed many. As we head into fall, let us reflect upon them and take heart. For when we simply begin with small tasks and work hard, work together to create a shared vision and have a plan, are willing to learn from one another, acknowledge that our faith needs are diverse, accept that there will always be weeds and consider viewing them in new ways, know that gardens are hard work and help one another. Have hope that our efforts to spread faith matter, and take time to show gratitude in the journey. We can, together, plant a garden of love and faith here at Middlebury Congregational Church, in our community, and the world. As the Apostle Paul once wrote in encouragement to the Galatians, "So let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. So then, whenever we have an opportunity, let us work for the good of all, and especially for those of the family of faith." Amen.